Before we dive in, just remember every story you hear is recorded by me in my own voice for hours at a time. No AI narration, just dedication and a love for great stories. If you appreciate that, hit subscribe. I never planned on visiting the town. In fact, before that trip, I had never heard of it. It was one of those tiny American towns you only notice while driving through. A few thousand residents, a one main street, a gas station, a diner, a church, the sort of place that feels frozen in time. I ended up there because of a storm, a bad one. I was driving across Colorado for work when heavy snow forced the highway to close. Hotels were full, motels were packed. The only place available was an Airbnb sitting on the edge of the town. The listing looked normal enough, a small two-story house, good reviews, affordable price, nothing unusual. If anything, it looked boring. At the time, boring sounded perfect. The host never met in person. The key was inside a lockbox near the front porch. I arrived shortly before sunset. The snow was still falling. The entire neighborhood seemed unusually quiet, not abandoned, just still, like everyone had decided to stay indoors. The house itself looked older than the photographs, not neglected, just aged. The wood creaked, the windows rattled slightly when the wind blew, the kind of house that immediately makes you lower your voice without knowing why. Inside, everything appeared exactly as advertised: living room, kitchen, two bedrooms, bathroom, nothing strange. I unpacked my bag, ordered takeout, watched television, and spent most of the evening listening to the storm outside. By midnight, I was exhausted. The drive had been long, the weather had been stressful. I fell asleep almost immediately. The dream started sometime after 3 in the morning. At least I think it was a dream. Even now, I'm not completely sure. In the dream, I was standing in the upstairs hallway. The house was silent, no wind, no storm, no sound at all. I remember noticing a door at the end of the hall, a narrow wooden door, painted dark blue. The strange thing was that I hadn't seen it before. I knew every room in the house by then. There was no blue door upstairs, yet in the dream it felt completely natural, as if it had always been there, waiting. I walked toward it slowly, not because I was afraid, because I felt curious, the way a child feels when discovering something hidden. The closer I got, the stronger that feeling became. Not fear, not excitement, recognition, as if I already knew what was behind it, even though uh, I had never seen it before. Then I woke up. The storm had ended. Morning sunlight filled the room. For several seconds, I lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about the dream. Eventually, I laughed it off. Travel does strange things to your sleep. New places, new sounds, new surroundings. Dreams happen. I got dressed and headed downstairs, and that should have been the end of it. Except when I reached the hallway, I stopped. Completely stopped. Because at the far end of the upstairs hall, there was a narrow blue door, exactly where it had been in the dream, exactly the same size, exactly the same color, exactly the same worn brass handle. I stood there for what felt like a minute, trying to understand what I was seeing. The door hadn't been there the night before. I was certain of it. The hall ended in a black wall. I remembered because I'd carried my suitcase past it twice. Yet now a door stood there as though it had always existed, quiet, ordinary, waiting. At first I assumed I was mistaken. Maybe I'd overlooked it. Maybe I had been tired after the drive. Maybe it blended into the wall somehow. Then I remembered the Airbnb listing, the floor plan, the photographs. There had only been two bedroom upstairs. No additional rooms, no extra spaces, no blue door. The logical part of my brain told me to ignore it, but curiosity is a powerful thing, especially when something impossible appears in a place that should be familiar. I walked through it. The old floorboards creaked beneath my feet. The house felt strangely quiet again, not empty, just attentive, as though the building itself was listening. When I finally reached the door, I noticed something carved into the wood, tiny letters almost invisible beneath the paint. A single sentence, so faint I nearly missed it. It read, "Only open this door if you wish you had more time." And for reasons I still don't understand, the moment I read those words, the brass handle turned by itself. So, for a few seconds, I simply stared at the handle. The movement had been small, barely noticeable, yet there was no question about what I had seen. The handle had turned on its own, not much, just enough for the latch to release. The blue door now stood slightly open, only an inch or two, but it was open. And beyond it, I could see darkness. I should have walked away. Looking back, I understand that now. Most strange experiences come with a moment when common sense gives you a chance to leave. This was mine. Instead, I pushed the door open. The first thing I noticed was the smell. No dust, no mold, not the stale air of an unused room. It smelled like rain, fresh rain. The kind that falls on summer afternoon, the kind that reminds you of childhood. For a moment I just stood there breathing it in. Then I stepped inside. The room wasn't what I expected. In fact, it wasn't really a room at all. It looked more like a library, a small one. The walls were lined with shelves from floor to ceiling. Hundreds of books filled them, maybe thousands. Old books, new books, leather bound books, paperback books, books in different languages, books of different sizes, every shelf packed tightly. Yet, despite the number of books, the room didn't feel crowded. It felt peaceful, almost comforting. A single lamp stood near an armchair in the center. Its warm light illuminated only a small area. The corners of the room remained hidden in shadow. I remembered thinking that the space seemed larger than it should have been, much larger. The dimensions didn't make sense. From the outside, there shouldn't have been enough room for it. The hallway wall backed directly onto the exterior of the house. There was nowhere for this library to exist, and yet there it was, quietly waiting. I spent several minutes examining the shelves. None of the books had titles on their spines. That struck me as odd. Every single volume was blank. No labels, no markings, nothing. Just rows and rows of anonymous books. Then I noticed something even stranger. Each shelf had a small brass plaque beneath it. Names, hundreds of names, different people. Each shelf seemed dedicated to someone. Curiosity pulled me deeper into the room. Eventually, I found a shelf near the back. The plaque beneath it stopped me cold because the name engraved there was mine, my full name, perfectly spelled. At first, I thought it had to be a coincidence, but deep down, I already knew it wasn't. The feeling was impossible to explain. The room seemed to recognize me, not in a threatening way, more like an old friend recognizing something after years apart. My shelf contained dozens of books, all identical. Dark blue covers, no titles, no markings, just like the others. I reached for the nearest one. The moment my fingers touched it, a strange sensation passed through me. Not pain, not fear, recognition again. That same feeling I'd experienced when approaching the door, as though I was reconnecting with something I had forgotten. I opened the book and immediately understood why none of the volumes had titles, because every book was a life, my life. The first page described a memory from childhood, not a famous memory, not an important one, something small, A summer afternoon, a bicycle, a scraped knee. The details were perfect, painfully perfect. The smell of the grass, the heat of the sun, the exact color of the shirt I had been wearing, things I hadn't thought about in decades, yet somehow the book remembered them, every detail. I turned another page, then another. The story continued. My school years, my first job, friends, mistakes, successes, failures, everything. Every page described my life exactly as it had happened, not approximately, exactly. The experience became unsettling very quickly. It felt less like reading and more like remembering. Each page triggered memories I thought were gone forever. Faces I hadn't seen in years returned instantly. Forgotten conversations resurfaced. Entire chapters of my life emerged from places I didn't know still existed inside my mind. Then I noticed something alarming. The pages weren't stopping. The book hadn't reached the present day yet. It continued beyond my current age, beyond the moment I was living, beyond the Airbnb, into the future. I closed the book immediately. My heart was pounding. The room suddenly felt less comforting than before, far less, because I realized what I was holding. This wasn't a journal, it wasn't a biography, it wasn't a collection of memories. It was a complete life, from beginning to end. And somewhere inside that book was the day of my death. I carefully returned the volume to the shelf. For the first time since entering the room, I felt genuinely nervous, not because of the room itself, because of temptation. A question had already begun forming inside my mind, a dangerous question, one that grows stronger the moment it appears. If the future was written, could I read it? I tried distracting myself. I walked away from my shelf, explored other parts of the room, examined more books, more names, thousands of them, perhaps 10 of thousands. The library seemed endless, much larger than any room could possibly be. The further I walked, the more shelves appeared, stretching into the distance, disappearing into darkness. Then I discovered something that changed everything. Near the center of the room stood a small wooden table. Unlike the shelves, it contained only one book, a single volume resting beneath the lamp, waiting. The cover wasn't blank, it had a title, only 3 words, 3 simple words, yet the moment I read them, a chill ran through my entire body. The title was People Who Opened the Door, and when I opened it, the first photograph staring back at me had been taken that morning as I entered the Airbnb. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. The photograph was unmistakable. It showed me pulling my suitcase from the trunk of my car. The angle appeared to be from across the street, yet I had never seen anyone outside when I arrived. The road had been empty. The neighborhood had been silent, and still, there I was, captured perfectly. I turned the page. Another photograph. This one showed me standing in the kitchen a few hours earlier, looking through the refrigerator. The picture had been taken from behind, as though someone had been standing only a few feet away, watching. The stranger part wasn't the photograph itself. It was the fact that I had been alone. At least I thought I had. The next page showed me sitting on the couch. The next showed me asleep. The next showed me standing in the upstairs hallway staring at the blue door. Every image had been taken before I opened it, before I discovered the library, before I knew any of this existed. A cold feeling settled into my stomach. I began turning pages faster. The photographs continued, page after page, moment after moment, every hour since my arrival. Then the image changed. They began showing events that hadn't happened yet. This first future photograph showed me standing exactly where I was, inside the library, holding the book. The next showed me walking deeper among the shelves. The next showed me sitting in the armchair beneath the lamp, reading. The image after that showed something unexpected. The library was empty, the chair sat vacant, the lamp remained lit, but I was gone. I flipped ahead. The photographs became increasingly difficult to understand. Some showed places I recognized, others didn't. In one image, I stood on a beach I had never visited. In another, I appeared much older, gray hair, wrinkles, a face shaped by decades I hadn't lived yet. Another photograph showed me holding a child I didn't recognize, a daughter perhaps, or a granddaughter. I couldn't tell. The emotions on my face looked real, the life looked real, everything looked real. And that was the moment I understood what the library actually was. The books weren't recording the future, they were recording possibilities, lives that might happen, lives that could happen, lives that existed somewhere beyond the choices we actually make. The realization should have comforted me. Instead, it made the room feel infinitely stranger. Because if those photographs represented possibilities, then how many possibilities existed? How many lives could a person have lived? How many roads had I never taken? How many versions of myself were scattered across the shelves? I returned to my own section. Now I noticed details I had missed before. The books weren't identical, not quite. Some were thicker, some thinner, some looked worn from use, others appeared untouched. I pulled another volume from the shelf, a different one, and opened it. The first pages were familiar. The same childhood, the same family, the same school. Then something changed. A single decision, a single decision unfolded differently. One small choice, one insignificant moment, a different path. And from that point onward, everything changed. The life inside the book belonged to me, yet it wasn't mine, not exactly. It was a version of me who had accepted a job in California years earlier, a version who had never moved east, never met certain friends, never made certain mistakes, never experienced certain heartbreaks. His life was completely different, and somehow, reading it felt like mourning someone who had never existed. I don't know how long I sat there, maybe an hour, maybe several. Time behaved strangely inside the library. The deeper I read, the harder it became to remember why I had entered the room in the first place. The outside world started feeling distant, less important, almost unreal. Then I found the dangerous shelf. Every library has one, the place a person shouldn't explore, the place curiosity inevitably leads. Mine stood near the back wall, partially hidden in shadow. The brass plate beneath it contained only two words. No name, no explanation, just two words. Regrets. The books on that shelf looked older than the others, darker somehow, heavier. The moment I saw them, I understood what they contained. Not possibilities, no, not alternate lives, the lives people wished they had chosen, the roads they spent years imagining, the choices they couldn't stop thinking about. I should have walked away. Instead, I took one of the books, opened it, and immediately found myself staring at a life I had secretly wanted for years. A life where one decision had gone differently, one relationship had survived, one goodbye had never happened, one person had stayed. The details were beautiful, painfully beautiful, the kind of beautiful that hurts, because part of you wants it to be real. Part of you starts believing it should have been real. I kept reading, then kept reading, and then kept reading, unable to stop. The library grew quieter around me. The lamp's warm glow seemed brighter. The outside world seemed further away. The pages became harder to leave. Each book offered another version of happiness, another version of success, another version of love, another version of time. And for the first time since discovering the blue door, I began to understand why someone might never leave. Then, as I turned another page, something unexpected happened. A folded piece of paper slipped from between the pages and landed on the floor. I picked it up. It wasn't part of the book. It was newer, much newer, as though someone had placed it there recently. The handwriting looked hurried, almost desperate, and at the bottom was a signature, not a name I recognized, just three words that instantly erased every feeling of comfort the library had created, because they suggested I wasn't the first guest to find this place. Far from it. The note ended with a warning written by someone who had clearly spent far too long inside. It said, "The library doesn't show what you lost, it shows what it wants you to miss." I must have read that note a dozen times. The words weren't dramatic, they weren't threatening. There was no warning about danger lurking in the shadows, no prediction of doom, just a simple observation. The library doesn't show what you lost, it shows what it wants you to miss, and somehow that felt far from unsettling. I folded the note and slipped it into my pocket. Then I looked around the room again. For the first time since entering, I stopped focusing on the books. Instead, I focused on the people who had been here for me, before me, or at least the traces they had left behind. The armchair beneath the lamp looked worn, not old, used. The wooden floor around it showed subtle signs of wear, as though countless people had sat there for countless hours turning pages, thinking, remembering, wishing. I began searching the room more carefully. The library was too organized to be random. Everything seemed arranged for a reason. Every shelf, every plaque, every book. The deeper I explored, the more I noticed small details. Bookmarks tucked between pages, folded notes, dates scribbled in margins, tiny signs that other visitors had spent time here, a lot of time. Most of the notes shared something in common. At first, I didn't recognize the pattern, then it became impossible to ignore. The earliest notes sounded curious, excited, almost amazed. The writers described wonder, discovery, possibility, the same emotions I had experienced, but the later notes felt different, much different. They sounded exhausted, obsessive, desperate. One note described spending days comparing different versions of life. Another described reading hundreds of possible futures trying to identify the best one. Someone had even created a system, charts, lists, comparisons, as though happiness could be measured mathematically if only they examined enough possibilities. And none of them sounded satisfied, not one. No matter how many books they read, no matter how many lives they explored, no matter how many perfect futures they discovered, the same pattern always emerged. Eventually, they found another possibility that looked better, and then another, and another, and another. The realization struck me harder than I expected because I recognized the feeling, not from the library, from real life. People spend years imagining that happiness exists somewhere else, a different job, a different city, a different relationship, a different version of themselves, always somewhere just beyond reach, always one decision away. The library often offered something dangerous: proof. Proof that those alternate lives existed. Proof that different outcomes were possible. Proof that another version of you might have gotten everything you wanted. And once you see that proof, how do you stop looking? I found myself staring at my own shelves again. Dozens of books, hundreds perhaps, each one containing another version of my life. Some better, some worse, many completely different. The temptation was overwhelming. I wanted answers. I wanted certainty. I wanted to know whether the life I was living was the right one. That was when I noticed something strange, a gap, a missing space on my shelf. One book was absent. Every other volume sat nearly in place except one. There was an empty slot, a space where a book should have been. I examined the shelf more closely. A small brass label sat beneath the empty space. Unlike the others, it contained a title. Only a few words, but the words immediately captured my attention. The life you were meant to live. For several seconds, I simply stared at the empty slot. The title felt deliberate, personal, as though it had been placed there specifically for me. And then a troubling thought occurred. If the slot was empty, where was the book? I searched nearby shelves, nothing. I checked the table beneath the lamp, nothing. The volume had vanished, or perhaps someone had taken it. That possibility bothered me more than it should have, because for the first time I began wondering whether the library was truly empty. I had assumed I was alone the entire time, but had I ever actually confirmed that? The room stretched far beyond what should have been physically possible. Entire sections disappeared into shadow, corridors of shelves vanished into darkness. For all I knew, someone could have been standing 100 feet away watching me, and I would never know. The thought lingered in my mind. Then another realization followed. The photographs in the book, the images of guests, the warning note, the worn chair, the missing volume. Every clue pointed toward the same conclusion. People had entered this place before. Many people. Some had spent a long time here, possibly much longer than they intended. I suddenly wondered what time it was. A simple question, yet couldn't answer it, not even approximately. I had completely lost track. Hours could have passed, maybe longer. The library contained no clocks, no windows, no indication of day or night, nothing. A sense of unease slowly replaced my curiosity. For the first time, I decided to leave, not forever, just temporarily. I wanted fresh air, a clear head, a chance to think. The books would still be here when I returned. At least I assumed they would. I started walking back toward the blue door, or at least toward where I thought the blue door should be. That's when I noticed something that stopped me cold. The shelves no longer looked familiar. The paths between them seemed different. The layout had changed. I turned around, tried retracting my steps. Nothing looked right. The lamp had disappeared. The armchair was gone. Even my shelf was nowhere in sight. Every direction revealed only more books, more corridors, more shadows. A slow realization settled over me, one that made my heart begin to race. I had spent so much time exploring the library that I no longer knew where the exit was. And somewhere in the endless silence between the shelves, I heard the faint sound of pages turning, as though someone else was reading, not far away. I stood perfectly still. The sound came again, soft, rhythmic, a page turning somewhere among the shelves, then another and another, not close enough to identify a location, not far enough to dismiss, just close enough to remind me that I might not be alone. Until that moment, the library had felt mysterious. Now I felt enormous, oppressively enormous. The kind of place that makes you realize how small you are. Every aisle looked the same, every shelf stretched into shadow, every direction offered another maze of books. I started walking, slowly at first, trying not to panic, trying to convince myself there was a simple explanation. Maybe I had become disoriented. Maybe the room only seemed larger because I had spent so much time inside it. Maybe I would find the blue door around the next corner, then the next, then the next. I didn't. Minutes passed, or what felt like minutes. The library gave no indication of time. The lighting never changed. The air never changed. Nothing aged. Nothing moved, except me, and the occasional sound of pages turning somewhere in the distance. Eventually, I noticed something unusual. The shelves were no longer filled exclusively with books. Some contained objects, personal objects, a baseball glove, a wedding ring, a train ticket, a faded photograph, a child's drawing, thousands of items arranged carefully among the books, each one appearing deeply meaningful to someone. The further I walked, the more objects appeared, entire shelves devoted to them. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing, then a realization slowly formed. They weren't random possessions, they were moments, or rather, reminders of moments, physical symbols attached to specific memories, specific choices, specific lives. I stopped in front of a shelf holding nothing but keys, hundreds of keys, house keys, car keys, hotel keys, old brass keys, modern electronic key cards, each one tagged with a small handwritten note. The notes described tiny decisions, moments no as so insignificant most people would forget them immediately. Yet each had altered the course of a life. One key belonged to a man who accepted a job offer, another belonged to a woman who had missed a flight, another belonged to someone who had decided not to make a phone call. Tiny moments, massive consequences, lives redirected forever. The deeper I ventured, the more a disturbing idea emerged. The library wasn't storing possibilities, it was feeding them, growing for them. Every regret, every second guess, every imagined alternative, every thought that began with what if. The place seemed built from those questions, sustained by them. And suddenly, the warning note made perfect sense. The library doesn't show what you lost, it shows what it wants you to miss. Because the more you focused on what you could have been, the harder it became to appreciate what actually was. I don't know how long I wandered after that, long enough for exhaustion to settle into my legs, long enough for fear to replace wonder completely. At some point, I sat down on the floor between two shelves. For the first time since entering the library, I stopped looking at the books. I stopped searching. I stopped wondering. And I simply sat there, thinking about my life. Not the perfect versions, not the alternate versions, the real one, the imperfect one, the messy one, the one filled with mistakes, the one filled with losses, the one filled with things I wished had gone differently. And the longer I thought about it, the more something became clear. Every version I had read seemed better in one area, but worse in another. The successful businessman had lost friendships. The happily married version had sacrificed dreams. The adventurous version had missed moments with family. The wealthy version had become lonely. The comfortable version had become stagnant. None of them were perfect, not one. The library had shown me countless lives, yet every life carried its own form of grief, its own sacrifices, its own disappointments. The difference was that the books highlighted only the parts designed to tempt you, only the parts designed to keep you reading. For the first time, I stopped wanting another life. And the moment that desire disappeared, something strange happened. The silence changed. A warm breeze drifted through the aisle, the first move in air I had felt since entering. Then came another sensation, a faint smell. Coffee, fresh coffee. The scent instantly transported me back to ordinary life, back to mornings, back to routines, back to reality. back to the imperfect world I had temporarily abandoned. I stood up, and there, only 20 feet away, stood the blue door, as though it had been waiting the entire time, as though it had always been there. The realization hit me immediately. The exit had never disappeared. I had, emotionally, mentally. The more I chased alternate lives, the further the door seemed to move. The moment I accepted my own life, I could see it again. I began walking toward it, not running, not rushing, just walking. The same way a traveler walks toward home after a long journey. Halfway there, I heard one final page turn behind me. I glanced over my shoulder only once. At the far end of the aisle sat an elderly man beneath a lamp, reading quietly. The first person I had seen inside the library. He didn't look frightening, he didn't even look strange, just tired, deeply tired, like someone who had spent years searching for an answer. His shelf beside him was nearly empty, only a handful of books remained. Thousands of others scattered around him lay open on the floor, as though he had spent an eternity reading every possible version of his life, looking for something, anything, that would finally satisfy him. For a moment I considered approaching him, then I noticed something heartbreaking. Every book he opened contained another book inside it, and inside that book was another, and another, and another. An endless chain of possibilities, an endless search for a better outcome, a search that could never end. I understood then. The library didn't trap people, it offered them exactly what they wanted, and some people never stopped wanting more. I gave the man a final glance, then stepped through the blue door and returned to the Airbnb hallway. But the moment I emerged, I realized something was wrong, because the house was no longer empty and someone was standing at the far end of the hallway waiting for me. For a moment, I simply stood there, the blue door behind me, the hallway in front of me, and a stranger standing motionless at the far end of the hall. The distance between us wasn't great, maybe 20 feet, yet something about this scene felt unreal, as though I had walked into the final moments of a dream. The man appeared to be in his 70s, gray hair, thin frame, dark coat, nothing remarkable, nothing threatening. If I had passed him on the street, I probably wouldn't have remembered him, but standing there in that hallway, he seemed oddly familiar. Not familiar in the way strangers sometimes resemble someone you know, familiar in a deeper way, a way that made me uncomfortable. Neither of us moved. The house was silent. Outside, the snowstorm had long since ended. Sunlight filtered through the windows. The ordinary world had returned, yet the atmosphere inside the house remained strangely still, as though the library hadn't fully let go of me. The old man looked around the hallway, then at the staircase, then at the framed photographs hanging on the walls. The expression on his face wasn't fear, it wasn't confusion, it was sadness, the quiet sadness of someone revisiting a place they once loved. And then I noticed something impossible. He was studying the house exactly the way I had when I first arrived. The same curiosity, the same uncertainty, the same sense of recognition, almost as though he had never been there before, yet somehow remembered it. The realization came slowly, then all at once. The old man wasn't waiting for me. He had just come through the blue door, too. A strange calm settled over me. I didn't know why. Perhaps because the mystery had finally become larger than fear. I had spent hours trying to understand the library. Now I was standing beside someone who might hold the answers. The old man's eyes eventually met mine, and in that instant, I understood why he looked familiar, not because I knew him, because I knew his face.
a little, around the eyes, around the jawline, in certain expressions, tiny similarities, the kind that became visible only after decades. The possibility struck me so suddenly that I almost laughed, not because it was absurd, because it felt inevitable. The man looked like an older version of me. Not exactly, but close enough. Close enough to make my pulse quicken. He seemed to reach the same conclusion. For a brief moment, neither of us looked away. The silence between us strangely felt peaceful, like two travelers crossing paths at the end of very different journeys. Then he smiled, a small smile, the kind people wear when they've finally stopped carrying something heavy. And for reasons I still cannot explain, I suddenly knew who he was. Not my future, not my destiny, not some magical prediction, just one possibility, one version of a life I could have lived, one version that had somehow wandered through the library for far longer than I had, perhaps decades, perhaps longer. He glanced toward the blue door, then back at me, and slowly shook his head, not as a warning, as advice, the kind of advice someone gives after learning a lesson the hard way. Then he walked past me, down the staircase, across the living room, and out the front door without saying a word. I rushed to the window moments later. The street outside was empty, no footprints, no sign of anyone leaving, only fresh snow sparkling beneath the afternoon sun. The old man had vanished. I wish I could tell you that I immediately packed my belongings and left. The truth is less dramatic. I spent the rest of the day thinking a lot about choices, about regrets, about the strange human habit of imagining that happiness exists somewhere else. That evening, before checking out, I walked upstairs one final time. The hallway looked completely normal. The blue door was gone. The wall stood bare and uninterrupted, exactly as it appeared in the Airbnb photographs, exactly as it should have. Part of me expected disappointment. Instead, I felt relief, the kind of relief that comes when a difficult chapter finally closes. A few hours later, I left town. The roads were open again, the snowstorm was over, life resumed, at least on the surface. Months passed, then years. The experience gradually became something I rarely discussed, not because I forgot it, because I carried it with me like a lesson, like a secret. Something else changed too. I stopped revisiting old regrets, not completely. No one can do that. But I stopped feeding them, stopped imagining perfect alternate lives, stopped measuring reality against fantasies. The strange thing is that my life improved afterward, not magically, not instantly, just steadily, because my attention finally returned to the life I was actually living, the only one that truly belonged to me. Then, almost 6 years later, something happened. I was cleaning out a closet in my house, one of those projects people postpone forever. Boxes, old photographs, forgotten paperwork, the usual things. At the bottom of a storage bin, I found a book, a dark blue book, no title, no markings, just a plain blue cover. The moment I touched it, I felt the same sensation, recognition, the exact feeling I had experienced in the library, the feeling of remembering something forgotten. Slowly, I opened the cover. Inside was a single page, nothing else. One page, one sentence, written in neat handwriting. The sentence read, "Of all the lives you could have lived, this one was worth keeping." I sat there for a very long time after reading it, not because I believed the library had sent me a message, not because I thought the book was magical, but because for the first time in my life, I realized I agreed with it. And somewhere, in some impossible room beyond a blue door that shouldn't exist, I like to imagine one more book quietly sliding back into its place on a shelf, closed at last. Subscribe if you liked it. Your subscription matters.